What are you going to be looking for? It's the opening statements today. Tomorrow we get to the Q&A portion. What are you going to be looking for from the Q&A portion for Judge Amy Coney Barrett?
Well, we're not going to expect Judge Coney Barrett really to answer questions directly. There's a reason for that. Ever since Robert Bork's failed nomination to the court, nominees have pretty studiously avoided saying much of anything. But I think we can sometimes read between the lines. I'll be curious to see if Judge Coney Barrett will call Roe v. Wade settled law. Settled law has come to have a particular meaning in the anti-abortion community, essentially the argument being that Roe v. Wade has failed to settle our abortion wars. So if she calls Roe v. Wade precedent, but won't say it's settled law, that may tip her hand a little bit. I'm curious, too, just to see how she plays a lot of questions about her views about everything from the Affordable Care Act to abortion, because she has more of a paper trail than some of the nominees we've seen in recent years.
And Professor, talk to me a little bit more about that, the way we've intertwined personal views to perhaps the way we can hear cases on a legal basis and make opinions based on that. Have we focused too much on her personal views, or are we rightfully looking at her personal views and basing the way she can look at a case in front of her based on that?
I mean, in my opinion, her personal views have been too much of a focal point, simply because we have a long and kind of open tradition almost of presidents picking justices with an eye to the results those justices will deliver. And we know this. President Trump has said this on multiple occasions about specific rulings, including but not limited to Roe v. Wade. So the fact that she was chosen it's an open secret that it's in part to engineer certain results. And I don't really see what the point of focusing on her religious beliefs or her prior pro-life commitments does, given that we already know that that's kind of the trajectory of many Supreme Court nominations.
It's just fascinating, just so close to an election, the themes of women's health issues, Catholicism, so many of these issues really out on the campaign trail where they are being talked about, including, mind you, whether or not Joe Biden would add the number of justices on the bench. Right. Let me ask you specifically, Mary, about what we know about how Judge Amy Coney Barrett's record is on financial regulatory matters. Do we know anything about her based upon her previous record?
Well, she doesn't have much of a record, right? She's only been a judge on the federal bench since 2017, but we know that she's had some concerns about the kind of federal administrative state as a whole, and that would include when it comes to financial regulatory matters. But I think one of the sort of brilliant strokes of choosing her is that while she has a paper trail, her record as a judge is relatively limited, so we're really only kind of making educated guesses.
I want to talk about some other educated guesses, particularly around the ACA, which we know hearing is coming up a week after the election. What do we know? What can we glean about not only her views, but the composition of the court, how they view the individual mandate, and if that really is the key issue in the hearing a week after the election?
Well, we know that Amy Coney Barrett was pretty skeptical of Chief Justice John Roberts' opinion that was the kind of key deciding vote to save the Affordable Care Act the last time around. Now, critics, people who support Barrett's nomination will stress that the current ACA case is different from that one, and that Barrett's criticisms don't necessarily apply to the case that's currently before the Cato Institute, for example, has made this point, the case that's currently before the court. I think her presence on the court in general creates kind of an insurance policy for conservatives, right? Because we saw this summer Chief Justice Roberts and sometimes Neil Gorsuch peeling away from the other conservatives, for example, to deliver votes that meant that at least DACA has had a reprieve for the moment, or that Title VII protects LGBT employees, or striking down an abortion restriction. So with an additional conservative on the court, that kind of breakaway vote stops mattering as much. And it also creates at least the possibility of a kind of more conservative coalition on the court that could push for more dramatic changes more quickly.
So on that point precisely, I want to follow up on that, especially if she is confirmed and she is on the Supreme Court and it's a 6-3 dynamic. I mean, who would the middle justices be, for lack of a better term? Because obviously it would have a conservative tilt. But as we've seen in the past, we have seen these breakaways in the past. So would there be almost a middle faction and then a left and a right, or no?
Well, it's too early to say where Amy Coney Barrett would fit on that spectrum, right? I mean, we've already seen some factions sort of begin to emerge. Justices Thomas and Alito have tended to vote together all the time and been the kind of further right wing of the court on a variety of issues, whether that's President Trump's tax records or abortion or everything in between. And then Justice Gorsuch has emerged as sort of a maverick figure who will sometimes write very, very conservative rulings and sometimes write not very conservative rulings, really depending on the topic. So he can be a middle vote, really depending on the issue. And then you have, I think, Justices Roberts and Kavanaugh, who are not particularly likely to be won over by arguments about the substantive law, but who are more concerned with either the court's institutional legitimacy or its reputation. And so on some topics, I think that would make probably Kavanaugh the middle vote, because he does seem to share some of Roberts' concerns about the court's reputation and image. And that might, for example, give him pause about striking down the ACA or overturning Roe v. Wade. And then you have someone like Gorsuch who might be more open to a wider range of arguments, but not necessarily as concerned about optics or reputation. And we simply don't know where Amy Coney Barrett is going to fit in the equation. I think the expectation, given some of her writings, has been that she may be more ideologically aligned with Thomas and Alito, but really only time will tell if that turns out to be true.
And Professor, final question here. What's the risk in the next 4 days something goes wrong? What would that risk be where this doesn't turn out the way that we expect it to go?
In terms of her not getting confirmed?
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, it's very unlikely because Amy Coney Barrett, I'm sure, is a student of history and has seen when judicial nominations can go south. And I don't think she would disclose anything that would doom the nomination. And the sort of unfortunate side effect of that is that Supreme Court nomination hearings are almost content-free now. And the best we can do is to kind of read between the lines and look at the sort of almost secret code that nominees are using to signal what they might be doing. But I would be extremely surprised if Amy Coney Barrett did anything to damage her chances because she understands exactly how the game is played, as most nominees have.